Welcome to the infiltration testing and BMP training. My name is Eric Drips. I'm a drainage reviewer here with City of Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections. And we're going to go over some of the requirements for construction permit and other permit submittals for infiltration testing to meet the stormwater code. So all of the infiltration feasibility and testing, that information is mostly going to be in the stormwater manual in the volume 3, section 3.2, in the appendix D, and in the infiltration test checklist. So the checklists have been updated slightly from the 2016 version. So again, similar to the workbook, please go onto our website to download the most recent versions for your project. So this figure is just kind of an overview of the process that's required for infiltration, feasibility, and testing. So to start off with, your preliminary assessment report is going to identify whether or not you need to investigate the site for infiltration. So first of all, refer to your preliminary assessment report before you get started on this process. So if your preliminary assessment report indicates that infiltration, feasibility, and testing is required, then move on to this process. If not, it can be skipped and identified on the on-site stormwater management summary sheet that it's not required. So the first step is the actual investigation and testing that feeds into the design and selection of the on-site stormwater management BMPs. And then there's the construction phase, which is going to utilize our standard details and the conditions as shown on the plans. So here's a list. This is from volume 3, section 2.5 of all the different infiltration BMPs. So to clarify first, infiltration BMPs does not include permeable pavement surface. That is an alternate surface BMP. It's not an infiltration BMP. The infiltration BMPs are BMPs that collect an area and concentrate it into a single BMP, whereas, say, permeable pavement surface or vegetated roof does not concentrate that runoff. So the infiltration BMPs include infiltration trenches, dry wells, bioretention, rain gardens, permeable pavement facilities, which differ from permeable pavement surface as they can collect, say, a roof area in addition to the stormwater that falls directly on the permeable pavement. It has a deeper base section to store that runoff before it can be infiltrated, and there's also a constructed overflow from the permeable pavement facility. There's also perforated stub-out connections, which are fairly rare, infiltration basins and infiltration chambers, which typically would only be used for larger projects. So in volume 3, section 3.2, there is a step-by-step process that needs to occur for infiltration feasibility and testing. So at every step in the process, if it is determined that infiltration is not feasible, then you don't have to go further in the process. So for step 1, evaluate infiltration investigation map. So this step will actually be conducted by the drainage reviewer for the preliminary assessment report. So that information will be available there, whether your site falls under the area of infiltration investigation not required area. So that map has been developed mostly to eliminate areas that are above steep slopes or in slide prone areas. And again, that process is already identified in the preliminary assessment report. And also, if you're doing some preliminary studies for your site, you can always contact us to see if we would require infiltration investigation, or that map layer is available on the GIS, the City of Seattle GIS site. So if your site is not mapped as infiltration investigation not required, you have to move on to step 2. That's when you evaluate horizontal setbacks and site constraints. So this could include, say, for a larger apartment building with zero lot line development or very minimal setbacks. Infiltration facilities require certain horizontal setbacks to even have that facility to be fit on site. So it has to be 5 feet from a private property line. It has to be 5 foot from any structure. It has to be 10 foot from any structure with a full basement. So if your site has the building filling up the entire site or most of the site, whereas you would not even be able to fit an infiltration facility, then you can demonstrate that infiltration is not feasible and you don't have to continue in this process. You'll have to put that information on the on-site stormwater management workbook and fill out your infeasibility criteria and potentially provide some additional information to confirm your interpretation of the site and the horizontal setbacks. But if you can show that you can't meet those horizontal setbacks, then you can stop in this process. So step 3 is to conduct a subsurface investigation and evaluate vertical separation requirements. So vertical separation requirements would include 1 foot from the bottom of a proposed facility to hard pan soil and 2 to 3 feet distance in the vertical direction to any groundwater. So if you go out there and on site to your project site and dig down to 3 feet and you hit hard pan soil, so this is soil, it's pretty much like rock, it's not going to infiltrate anything, then you can demonstrate that you would not be able to meet vertical separation projects or vertical separation requirements, and then you could stop the evaluation process there. So all of this information, again, the horizontal, all the different horizontal setbacks, vertical setbacks are identified in the manual a little bit more specifically, and the vertical setbacks specifically are also shown on the infiltration checklist. So step 4, if you're able to meet the horizontal and vertical separation, then that's when you actually conduct your infiltration testing. So that's when you'll actually dig the required size of the hole, measure how fast the water is going into the ground, and complete your infiltration test checklist. So the design infiltration rate will be, for most projects, for small projects that are simple infiltration tests, the factor will be 0.5 from your measured rate to your design rate. So that's to account for different aspects of the infiltration rate over time. And step 6 and 7, so 6, there's, for larger projects, there's some more complex analysis that might need to occur. And step 7, evaluate the use of infiltration to meet minimum requirements. So if you make it all the way to step 7, you should have a design infiltration rate, plug it into your on-site stormwater management workbook, and then you can use that rate to determine the sizing and type of your BMPs. So here's that infiltration investigation not required. So if you go on to our STCI GIS site and go over to the layers list and check the green stormwater infrastructure infiltration evaluation not required, it's quite a mouthful, then that layer will show up on the map. So there are some complexities here, potentially, even if your site is mapped, even if you see that part of your site has this layer going across it, there are some inconsistencies in the mapping that may have identified that in error. Also for larger sites so again, this is a good tool to do research and to get an idea of whether or not you're going to need to infiltrate on site. However, really you want to look at your preliminary assessment report or contact us about your specific site to verify that. Some may be obvious if you're on a steep slope and your entire site is covered by this map. It should be obvious, but again, there are some aspects of this where your specific site might have different requirement. So this flowchart is located in the stormwater manual. It takes you through all of the different requirements that need to occur for determining infiltration feasibility for the site. And just to highlight a few things here. So here is at the top right, these are the horizontal setbacks that are required. So here's your 5 feet from property line, 10 feet from another infiltration facility, 5 feet from building without a basement. There's some aspects that probably won't apply to most projects, mostly relating to contamination, landfill, but this is where all of your horizontal setbacks are located. The other aspect of the horizontal setbacks is that there is no required horizontal setbacks from the right-of-way. So you could propose a infiltration facility right up to the right-of-way line. The 5 feet from property lines only applies to other private property lines and not the right-of-way. So this is another table that helps you determine what the requirements are for infiltration investigation for your project. So the different types of analysis and investigations are based on the amount of impervious area infiltrated on the site. So your impervious area is not going to, say, include your permeable pavement surface or vegetated roof. It will only include your impervious driveways or your rooftops without a vegetated roof. So this is different than, say, the drainage thresholds that are based on new and replaced hard surface. This is going to be based on your impervious area infiltrated on the site. So the biggest difference here to highlight is that depending on the amount of impervious area infiltrated on site, whether or not a licensed professional is going to be required. So if you're infiltrating less than 2,000 square feet or less than 5,000 total and less than 2,000 to each individual infiltration facility, then you can use the simple infiltration checklist and the licensed professional is not required. So if you have a 3,500 square foot hard surface site and you have if you're sending all of that hard surface, that impervious surface, to a single facility, that would require a pilot infiltration test and a licensed professional. But if you were able to break that up into two different facilities, each with less than 2,000 square feet of impervious surface going to each, and they're meeting at least 10 feet separation between the two facilities, then you can go back to the simple infiltration test and not requiring the licensed professional. But if you're infiltrating more than 5,000 square feet impervious area on site, regardless, that's going to require a small pilot infiltration test and a licensed professional to stamp and sign the test checklist. There, for the very large projects, they also start to get into groundwater monitoring, potentially groundwater mounding, acceptance testing. Not going to get into too much detail there, but all the information is here about when those would be required, and those are going to be for very large projects where you're infiltrating a large amount of impervious surface. So the only one difference for the 2021 code, as you can see here, is that if you're infiltrating more than an acre of impervious surface for the site, you have to conduct a large pilot infiltration test. The small pilot infiltration test is no longer permitted. So here's just to highlight a few changes, a few other changes for the 2021 manual. That there's some specifics related to infiltrating more than 5,000 upgraded from contaminated sites. The simple infiltration is not allowed for projects with no off-site point of discharge, so you have to have a licensed professional conduct a small pilot infiltration test if you have no approved off-site point of discharge. So if you have to infiltrate all of your stormwater on site, there's no available point of discharge for drainage. Again, as I mentioned previously, permeable pavement is not included in the impervious area total, and small-scale pilot infiltration tests may be substituted if the site has a high infiltration rate, making the large-scale pilot infiltration difficult. And again, those are for the really, really large projects. So as I mentioned before, these are the tables for the subsurface investigation depths and to verify whether or not you're meeting your required vertical setbacks. So the minimum investigation depth, it varies between the wet season, November to March, or the dry season, April to October, so it depends on when you're conducting it. The minimum investigation shown there is based on the depth below the proposed facility. So if you have a permeable pavement facility, the depth is going to be approximately 2 feet. And again, that's assuming that your existing and proposed grades are not too different. This is the minimum investigation below the proposed facility. So if your permeable pavement facility is about 2 feet deep, you need to go 2 feet below that for your subsurface investigation. So it would be a total, assuming finished grade and existing grade is about the same, the total depth would be about 4 feet. So you have to go down that deep. That's not where you have to conduct your test for your simple subsurface investigation, but it is where you need to determine if there is any groundwater or hard pan soils within that depth. And your minimum vertical separation is then listed there. It's going to be 1 foot below the proposed facility for groundwater, 1 foot for hydraulically restrictive, and 2 feet below for groundwater if conducting in the dry season, and still 1 foot for hydraulically restrictive soil. The standard subsurface investigation elements, so again, if you look at the previous slide, if you're infiltrating more than 2,000 square feet of impervious surface, you have to do a standard subsurface investigation. So this table is going to, it's going to change a little bit here. So if you look at the all infiltration BMPs, the second portion of that table, the dry season investigation depth is a little deeper than it is for the simple subsurface investigation. And again, the standard one is required for any project with more than 2,000 square feet of impervious surface infiltrated on site. And this is for the comprehensive subsurface investigation. So this is going to include projects with significant amounts of impervious surface that are going to be infiltrated on site. Again, referring to that table 3.1 again for the different requirements for subsurface investigation for your project. So here's just some, just going to go over the simple infiltration test a little bit, how it's conducted. So again, there's a difference whether if you're doing the test in the dry season or the wet season. You have to do your subsurface investigation a little deeper if you're doing it in the dry season versus the wet season. The theory being, of course, when it's raining, the groundwater level is going to be higher. The minimum hole for the actual testing is going to be 2 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet deep. The infiltration test checklist is going to take you through a step-by-step process for how you conduct the test. So there's basically going to be a pre-soak phase, a testing phase, and then you determine your measured rate from the testing and do the design rate based on that measured rate, which is going to be, for most projects, half of what the measured rate is. And again, the checklist takes you through that step-by-step process, and if infiltration investigation is required for your site, we will require that you upload a completed checklist to the portal with your project. So for a pilot infiltration test, again, the pilot infiltration test is required for projects that are infiltrating more than 5,000 square feet on site of impervious surface or 2,000 square feet to a single facility. Again, this needs to be oversaw by a licensed engineer. The small pilot infiltration test needs to be stamped and signed by the licensed professional. And it's more complex. There's more excavation that's going to be required, and the intent of this test is to more closely mimic the actual finished condition of the facility. The test has to actually be conducted at the proposed bottom of the facility. So if, say, you're installing a 4-foot deep dry well, the simple infiltration test is only going to require you to do the test at 2 feet deep, but the pilot infiltration test, you have to conduct that at the proposed bottom of the facility. Again, the licensed professional is required, and there's a difference between the small and the large pit. Again, those are going to be outlined in the manual and on the checklist. And again, use the checklist and use the most up-to-date checklist from the website. So after you have conducted the infiltration test, you've completed your checklist, you have a measured rate, then that measured rate is going to be entered into your on-site stormwater management workbook. So that is going to be used to select and design your facilities using the workbook. So the feasibility of some of these BMPs is going to depend if you're meeting the minimum measured rate. So the minimum measured rate, that's what you actually calculated in the field. That's before you apply your correction factor of 0.5. For the infiltration trenches and the dry wells, the minimum measured rate is going to need to be 5 inches per hour. If you've measured less than that, then those facilities cannot be used for on-site list approach BMPs, and you'd be moving down to the next category of BMPs. So the infiltrating bioretention without under drain is going to be measured rate of 0.6 inches per hour, and the rest of those infiltration facilities are going to be 0.3 inches per hour. So the one thing I want to point out here is for the permeable pavement surface. So you're not required to do infiltration testing to propose permeable pavement surface, but if you've done an infiltration test and the measured rate is less than 0.3 inches per hour, you can use that as an infeasibility criteria for the permeable pavement BMP. But permeable pavement surface does not require that the infiltration test to be conducted in order to use that BMP for meeting on-site stormwater management. So here's just a list of the different measured rates that are required, and also this second column here is going to show the minimum measured rates for meeting flow control, water quality treatment, and the performance standard. So again, here's the section in the on-site list approach calculator where you're going to enter the results of your infiltration test. So that first question is infiltration investigation required. Typically that'll be yes if you're not mapped as it not being required, and no if it is mapped as not being required. So if it is yes and you're required to investigate for infiltration, you identify the type of tests that you've done and whether or not that test resulted in infiltration being feasible. So if it's not feasible, you would say no and say that you can't meet horizontal or vertical setbacks, or it's a contaminated site, whatever the reason may be. And if it is feasible, then you're going to enter your infiltration rate. For the simple infiltration test, that infiltration rate correction factor is automatically going to be 0.5. For the small pilot infiltration test, that could be altered depending on the opinion of the licensed professional. It could go down as far as 0.2 depending on what the licensed professional thinks about, say, the variability of the soils for the site. And that site measured infiltration rate is then going to feed into the rest of the workbook and be used for the sizing criteria for the facility. So the sizing tables are all included in the manual, but the on-site list approach calculator has those tables built in to automate. All you need to do is put the infiltration rate in, put the amount of contributing area in, and some of the other facility inputs, such as the side slopes for a bioretention facility, and then it's going to automatically give you a size that you'll then put on your drainage control plan. So thanks so much for joining us today. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact us again at sidesewerinfo@seattle.gov or 206-684-5362. And we'll be following up with a question and answer live session where we'll be able to answer your questions live. Stay tuned for information for how to attend that Q&A session. And also there's going to be another slideshow presentation to focus a little bit more on the specific BMPs that have changed and been updated for the 2021 code, and that will be available on our Stormwater Code website as well. So thanks again for joining us, and as always, feel free to reach out to us. We know that all of these projects have their specific challenges, and we're here to help and answer questions as the process goes along. So thanks again. Have a great day.